completely untrue. The truth is that every single paper is read in full and in detail by the handling editor. We never make decisions on papers that we haven't actually read. Another myth is that you have to reformat your paper for every new journal during the initial submission process. And this isn't true. All CellPress journals, and actually many other journals, are format agnostic at the initial submission stage. So we don't care what format your references are in, or that your abstract is the exact right length, or that your methods are in the journal's format. Just make sure that all the information necessary to evaluate the paper is there, and that's all we need. If the paper clears peer review, we'll ask you to make some formatting changes when we get ready to publish the paper. But at this initial stage, we don't want to make anything more difficult for the authors. We know that it takes a long time to prepare a paper, and there's no point in making you do this over and over again, especially if the paper doesn't end up going out for peer review. So we want to make things as simple as possible for you. So another myth is that the editors will actually send the paper to the people that you exclude as reviewers. And I assure you that at CellPress, we always honor reviewer exclusions. You're allowed to exclude 3 reviewers, and we absolutely will not send the paper to these people. So it's to your benefit to make use of this option to exclude anyone that you think may have a conflict of interest or who you think may not judge your work fairly. Another myth is that you have to do every single experiment that the reviewers ask for or your paper won't be accepted. And this is also often not the case. Your decision letter will contain some guidance on the most important issues that need to be addressed. But if you have concerns with some of the experiments that the reviewers are asking for, please email your editor to discuss. We don't want you spending a year doing an experiment that will only minimally impact the main message of the paper, or struggling to do an experiment that you know is not technically feasible because the reviewers asked for it. So please reach out to us if you have concerns, and we're happy to discuss, and we may consult the reviewers to come to a more reasonable revision plan. And finally, a lot of people think that they have to be from a well-known lab to get their paper reviewed. And this also isn't true. Our goal as a journal is to publish the best science. We don't give special preference based on what lab you came from or your lab's reputation. For most of the papers that I sent out to review, I actually don't know the authors. And I love when I get to help a new PI publish the first paper from their lab. So then what do editors look for in a paper? It's easy to read a paper and find the flaws. I'm sure that you all do this during Journal Club, where you sort of pick a paper apart and try and come out with what they should have done or what's missing. And no paper is perfect, including the papers that we publish. And there's always going to be something more that could be done. So what we try to do when we read papers is read them for what's exciting rather than focusing on the flaws. We're looking for potential here. So does the paper ask an interesting question? This is a question that's important for the field that people would be interested in. Does it advance the field and give us a new perspective on a topic? Does it provide mechanistic insight and explain sort of how things work? Are the experiments logically designed and well controlled? And are the models that are being used appropriate? What's the physiological relevance of the findings? Under what setting is this process occurring, and how important is this process? So these are some of the things that we're looking for when we evaluate a new manuscript. So now I want to move on to some tips on how to write your paper. So the first step is to choose the right journal. You shouldn't just submit your paper to the highest impact journal in your field. This will only elongate the time it takes to get your work published, as you'll likely end up bouncing from journal to journal, and this can be very frustrating. Instead, think objectively about your work and the audience that will appreciate it best. Is it a very broad advance that you're reporting that would be appreciated by those across multiple fields? If so, maybe a broad journal like Cell is appropriate. Is it a major advance for the field, but maybe not across multiple fields? In that case, maybe a more specialized field-specific journal would be a better fit. It's a good idea to read the aims and scope pages for your target journals and to spend some time reading the journal of interest. How does your work compare to what you see published in the journal? If you look at the references that you cite in your paper, that may also help you decide what the best fit for your work might be. The right journal will have editors that know the field well, can identify the right reviewers, and will help guide you through the process. So why should you consider publishing with CellPress? CellPress has a number of journals across a wide area of disciplines and impact factors. CellPress journals are all staffed by full-time in-house professional editors who have Ph.D.s in the relevant field, and most also have postdoctoral training as well, so we're all scientists. We act as an impartial surrogate for the broad readership and are there to help you through the process from the initial evaluation of the paper to publication and post-publication promotion. Because being an editor is our primary job, we have the time to actively engage with authors and reviewers and to provide timely, unbiased decisions. We also maintain high scientific standards during the review process and make team-based editorial decisions. In addition, CellPress will help promote your work to increase its visibility and reach with features like previews, audio or video interviews, press releases, and social media. So if you're still not quite sure what journal is the best fit for your paper, one helpful option is to submit what we call a pre-submission inquiry. And this involves submitting the title, abstract, and possibly a cover letter. And we'll give you some quick feedback on whether we think the paper could be a good fit for the journal in terms of the level of advance and scope, et cetera. So you can submit a pre-submission inquiry to multiple journals to help you find the one that's the best fit for your work. And this is often the most helpful when you're finishing up the work, so you can get a sense of any final experiments you might want to do. Maybe you submit a pre-submission inquiry to immunity, and we say, this is really interesting, but, we would really need some mechanistic insight to make this, a good candidate for us. So then you could spend that last month trying to flesh out that mechanistic side of things. So we can provide you some guidance in that sense. If the paper is already ready to go, it may be faster to just submit it to the journal so that we can read the full paper, as our initial decisions are usually made in about 3 to 5 days. Another option is co-submissions. So you're allowed to submit your full paper to 2 CellPress journals simultaneously. To do this, you would submit the paper to one journal and indicate in the cover letter that you'd like the paper to be co-considered at the other journal. This can be helpful if your paper is in the scope of 2 different journals. For example, if it's an immunometabolism paper, and you feel like it could fit well both at immunity or cell metabolism. In this case, both journals would independently read and evaluate the manuscript. You get a handling editor at each journal. And if both journals wanted to review, the editors would work together to select one set of 3 reviewers who will look at the paper for both journals. I'm happy to talk about this more if there are any questions. So please enter your questions in the box, and we can discuss more at the end if you'd like. So now on to some writing tips. A good paper will tell a story. It'll explain the background, the main question that's being addressed, and take the readers on a journey towards understanding what was done and what the findings imply. Don't think about writing the paper as a chore that you have to do at the end after you finish your experiment. Think about it as a way to share your work with your field. The paper should essentially walk the reader through the rationale for the work. What's the relevant background? What's the question you're addressing? How did you do this work, and what did you find? This isn't a hyped sales job or sales pitch, but it is important to bring readers along with you. And remember that not everyone is going to be an expert in your field. So if you think about your readers, many of them will not know your field or your work as well as you do. So think about that broader perspective and how you convey the importance and interesting aspects of your work to someone who may not know everything that you know. It's often good to get feedback on your paper from colleagues, but also from someone outside your immediate field who can provide fresh eyes on the work. For non-native English speakers, there are a range of language editing services that are available to help ensure that your writing style is clear and concise. A good paper will bring the reviewers along with them, but try not to hide caveats or missing links. Be upfront about these and try to integrate them into the narrative. Moving on to the cover letter. The cover letter is only seen by the editor. The reviewers don't see the cover letter, so this is your chance to communicate directly with the editor. The cover letter should briefly summarize the question that you're addressing and your main findings. You shouldn't just paste in your abstract. It should explain a little bit about the background, question you're addressing, how the work advances the field, and this is also where you should mention any related manuscripts or competitive situations. If you're worried about a particular paper that was published that may undercut your work, you can mention why you feel that your paper is advanced over that work. Maybe your experimental strategy is better, or maybe your findings conflict with theirs because you used more patients or more advanced techniques. This is also where you should mention your reviewer suggestions and exclusions, and I encourage you to take the opportunity to do both. Reviewer suggestions are also helpful to us because it gives us a sense of who you think is well qualified to review your paper. And the cover letter is also your chance to show your excitement about the work. Although we don't allow priority claims or novelty claims in the main paper, You can highlight these aspects candidly in the cover letter and tell us, this is the first time anyone has done X, Y, Z, or this is the most, the highest resolution anyone's ever looked at this topic in, things like that. So this is where you can express that and tell us why you think that your manuscript is, important and should be considered further at the journal. So moving on to the title and abstract. The title and abstract are the most visible parts of your journal. And once the paper is published, most readers will decide whether or not they're going to read your paper based on these two aspects of the work. So the title should be declarative, and it should state the main conclusion of the work. For example, we see a lot of descriptive titles in the format of, the role of gene X in exhausted T cells. But this doesn't tell us much about what you really found. Is gene X promoting or inhibiting exhaustion? How is it working? A more declarative title might be something like gene X promotes T cell exhaustion during chronic infection by inhibiting gene Y. This gives the reader a much more clear picture of the work and what the main advance is. The abstract should start by setting the stage for the work with a little bit of background and by stating the question that you're addressing. But the abstract should focus mainly on what you've done in the paper and shouldn't contain, half of it shouldn't be the background essentially. So it should focus on what was done, what you found, and it should make it clear what models were used. So are you doing this in mice, humans? Are you using genetic models? Is there some disease relevance? And remember that you're writing for a broad audience. So again, you know every detail of the work in the background really well, but try and take a step back to think about your audience and try not to make assumptions about what your audience knows, and make sure you define all abbreviations. So be accurate and avoid overstating, and end with a summary sentence that states the implications of the work for the field. Next, the introduction. The introduction should walk the reader through the background for the work, and it's important to keep your audience in mind again. Are you writing for a broad scope journal or a more specialized journal? Either way, it's important to highlight what we already know and to try not to go overboard on citing your own work, and also to highlight the gaps in our knowledge and clearly state the questions that you're addressing in the work, and with a brief summary of the main findings of the manuscript. The results section will likely be the bulk of your paper, and there are a few things that you can do to help the readers follow along with your results. So one thing is to make sure that subsection headings state the main conclusion of the section, and that the first sentence of each section should help explain the logic and rationale for the set of experiments. Explain the models that you use in detail. Don't assume that the readers know which cell type your particular pre-driver deletes in. And each section should end with a summary sentence that states the main conclusion of that section. Try not to overstate the significance of the findings, and be concise and clear, and try to avoid field-specific jargon and priority or novelty claims. And just because a reviewer allows 7 figures and 55,000 characters, don't feel like you have to stretch your paper to meet those limits. Tell the story simply and concisely, and think carefully about what data to put in the main figures versus the supplement. Don't just use the supplemental information as a data dumping ground where you put everything in that you did. Think about carefully what's necessary to tell the story and what's helpful to explain what you did and what you found. Moving on to the discussion, this is where you can put your findings into the context of the rest of the field. So this shouldn't be a rehashing of the results. So you shouldn't restate everything that you did in the results section, but instead you should integrate your findings into the rest of the field and make sure to cite relevant papers, that relate to your work. Reviewers will notice omissions of important work, especially if you're trying to sort of downplay something that might impact the novelty of your work. Reviewers are often aware of this literature, and so it's more helpful to actually just come out and discuss those things candidly and explain why you think your work is an advance over that previous work. It's also good to highlight any caveats to your work or alternative interpretations, and to provide any explanations for results that may contradict previously published work. You can also discuss the implications for the work and the next steps for the field, and any future plans that you have for the work. So next, moving on to the figure legends. Figure legends should also contain titles that state the main conclusion of the figure, and they should clearly describe what was done and what's being shown, as well as how many samples were analyzed and how many independent experiments were performed. The legend should also provide information on statistics, but they should not contain conclusions or data interpretations. Those are for any of that stuff should go into your results and discussion, but it doesn't belong in your legends. And in terms of the methods, several years ago, CellPress implemented a specific methods format to promote reporting, transparency, and reproducibility, and this is called STAR methods. And the methods section and references section do not count towards the character count of the paper, so make sure you're as clear as possible about what was done. Don't just refer to other papers for methods, but instead provide the details for all experiments in the methods section. And as I mentioned, when you first submit your paper, you're not required to follow this formatting. So there's no need to include STAR methods at your initial submission unless you'd like to. But either way, all methods should be described in full, and any necessary data sets such as RNA-seq, et cetera, should also be provided with links so that the reviewers can access the data. So I've just given you a lot of information about how to write a good paper, but I want to stress that while this is all important, we're really focused on the science. And the most important thing is to make sure that your paper is scientifically sound and that it's done well. So not having a perfect title or an amazing abstract will not kill your paper. The editors are going to read the full paper no matter what, and we're focused on the science. However, writing your paper well will ensure that your message comes across clearly to both the editor and reviewers. And it can, and remember also that reviewers decide whether or not to review a paper just based on seeing the title and abstract. In addition, if your paper is sloppy, if it's got a lot of errors in the figures, in referencing, or if it's written poorly, this can also impact the reviewer's confidence in the data. So check and double check your figures to ensure there are no errors or duplications, and keep your records organized in case the editors or reviewers request to see the raw data. Once a paper is published, people are also more likely to read a paper if it's clearly written, and if they can easily understand what's going on. So next, I'll talk briefly about how decisions are made. So this is an example of the recommendations from 3 reviewers on 3 different papers, followed at the end by the decision letter that I sent to the authors. So it's rare that reviewers actually all agree on what should happen to a manuscript. So it's almost never an easy tally of yeses and nos that determines the next step for the paper. You can see here several examples of reviewer recommendations. And in the first case and second case, you can see that both got an accept, reject, and minor revisions from each of the reviewers, but the final decision was different in those cases. One received minor revisions and one received a major revisions decision. And then the final example, you can see there was definitely some discord here, minor revisions, accept, and major revisions, and that paper ended up being rejected. So every paper is unique. And what you don't see here is that there are often multiple additional discussions between the editors and reviewers, and often the editors and authors before a final decision is made. So to make a decision, the editor integrates all of the feedback on the paper, including the reviewer's comments and their expertise, as well as the editor's assessment of the paper and the feedback from the rest of the editorial team, as well as the nature of anticipated revisions and the feasibility of these experiments, along with looking at the conceptual advance and general interest level of the paper. So as I mentioned, we often get additional feedback from the reviewers once they've read the other reviewers' comments. And occasionally we may also consult another independent expert in the field on specific issues. We also sometimes ask for a response from the authors to the reviewers' comments before making a decision. But overall, this is an editorial decision, and we will and often do overrule reviewers. So some of the questions that we ask when making a decision is how close is the present state of the manuscript to the standard of the journal? So is it very interesting and close to the standards of the journal in the field? In that case, we would likely invite a revision. Is it very interesting but too preliminary? In that case, we would want to decide, how much can the authors do? Is it reasonable to ask them to do this, additional work to try and get into the journal, or would it be better if they took the paper elsewhere? Is the question, that they're addressing interesting and important, but the data don't support the conclusions. In that case, depending on how far off it is, it may be reasonable for the authors to try and bolster those data to try and support the conclusions better. Or there are questions to the level of interest in the findings, in which case it may be more suitable for another journal. We also look at the nature of revisions that would be required. So are the revisions significant but very specific? So is there a clear path forward we could see? Or are the revisions so extensive that would essentially mean constructing a new manuscript? If there are multiple conclusions being questioned, then this may be a situation where it's better to revise for a different journal. And if the revisions seem like they could change the main message of the study, that's another concern for us that may mean that we may not want to continue forward with the paper. So what do you do after you receive a decision? Once you receive your decision, you should read the reviews carefully and then formulate a plan based on the scientific issues and what will best help improve the study. So find the constructive points and identify the underlying issues. If you have concerns with some of the reviewer requests, contact your editor to discuss. When you write your point-by-point response, copy all of the reviewer comments exactly as written and respond to them respectively. Things like page numbers and line numbers and highlighting in the text can help speed up the re-review process and will often make reviewers happier. If your paper was rejected editorially or after review, you have the option to appeal the decision. It's best to give yourself a day or two before writing to the editor, because I know that emotions can be running pretty high when you get that decision. But it's good to take some time and think about what you want to say. And when you do write, focus your appeal on the science and any new data that you may have, and try to avoid any personal attacks on either the editors or the reviewers. I mentioned earlier that if your paper gets rejected, you have the option to transfer within CellPress. So the goal of the transfer process is to help you find a place to publish your paper within CellPress as quickly and smoothly as possible. And this is entirely author-driven, but the editors can help and guide you if you desire that. So we can often help you by suggesting other journals that might be a good fit. If you give us permission and want us to talk to another journal about your paper, we can also do that and try and sort of highlight why we think the paper is really strong, even though it might not be for us, but why it might be a really good fit for a different journal. And you can transfer whether or not a paper was sent out for peer review at the initial journal. So if it was rejected without review at Immunity, for example, you could transfer that to another journal. And if it was rejected with review, after review, you could also transfer that paper. If the paper is transferred after peer review at the original journal, the reviews and reviewer identities are transferred with the paper if you'd like. You can also ask for a fresh start at the new journal. So let's say you got reviewed at Cell and your reviews were great and you want to address those reviews. Cell did not offer a revision, but you feel like you can address those reviews and you want to transfer to Immunity. So you can do that and submit your paper with a point-by-point response to Immunity to those Cell reviews, and we'll consider those reviews in our decision. However, if you got reviewed at Cell, and let's say you don't like the reviewers' comments, you feel like they missed the point, or you just want another fresh set of eyes, you can transfer the paper to us and tell us, listen, this was reviewed at Cell, but we'd like a fresh take. We'd like a fresh start. And so in that case, if we decide to review it, we'll go to 3 new reviewers. We won't look at the previous reviews or decisions, so that won't impact our view of your paper. And we'll sort of essentially start that process over and give you a fresh take. And you have the ability to revise your paper before you transfer to the next journal. So you can either revise based on the reviews you have and then transfer, or if you'd like, you can transfer with a point-by-point response and ask the journal editor, this is our plan, what do you think? And have some additional discussions before you actually submit the version that you want to send out to review. But either way, it's helpful to contact the journal that you want to transfer with any questions. So what happens after your paper clears peer review? So once your paper clears peer review and is pre-accepted, depending on the journal, it might go through a round of scientific editing to help improve the clarity of the scientific message. And this focuses especially on the title abstract, e-talk highlights, methods, keywords table, etc. And we'll also check for formatting issues. And once all issues are addressed, the paper will be accepted officially. Once your paper is accepted, it'll undergo copy editing, formatting, and figure styling with the production staff, and you'll receive the proofs. And once everything's finalized, we'll get it published online as soon as possible. And we'll also help promote your work and improve the visibility of your work with previews and other visual content, as well as press releases and posts on our social media channels and promotion on our journal websites to increase the reach of the article. So just a few tips on how to be a good reviewer. So remember that the work that you're reviewing is confidential. So don't discuss the work with anyone who's not involved in the reviewing process with you. Disclose any conflicts ASAP when you're invited to review. So a conflict of interest would be, you've published, usually we'll check to see if you've published with the authors or not, but maybe you're collaborating on a grant or a project that hasn't been published yet. So let us know if you're have a close either personal or professional relationship with the authors, or if you're working on something that's very similar to the thing that we're asking you to review and you feel like it's just a little too close. Those are some examples of conflicts. So decline to review if you have a conflict of interest, but if you're not sure, contact the editor and they can advise you. Please let us know who helped you with the work. If it's a postdoc or colleague, put their name in there so they can also get the credit. If you review, be fair and constructive and be timely. If you're too busy to review, it's best to just decline rather than accepting and dragging things out. And confidential comments to the editor can be more candid, but they should match the tone of the comments to the authors. Telling the authors that their work is exciting and a major advance, and then telling the editors that you find incremental will only lead to confusion for the authors. So this is just a summary of the important things to cover in your review. So start by summarizing the study and the question that the authors are addressing and the main models and results. Highlight the strengths of the study and tell us what you think about the level of advance. If you have concerns about the advance due to previously published work, please provide references. Highlight major concerns, but try to focus on issues necessary to support the main conclusions. Don't try to morph the paper into what you wish it was. Highlight any minor concerns and let us know if there are any issues with transparency reporting. And keep in mind as you're doing this that the authors have likely spent years working on this paper. So be honest and constructive, but also be kind and respectful. Okay, next I just want to highlight some innovations and community building at CellPress. So our website, cell.com, maintains a host of materials to enable researchers to optimize publication of their research. From the journal homepage, readers can freely access galleries such as the CellPress Picture Show, which contains beautiful images, as well as CellPress videos that describe various aspects of the publishing process or describe certain papers in detail from the authors, as well as podcasts and best of collections and special issues and more. In addition, at the article level, we've introduced several article enhancing elements such as star methods and figure 360. And we also introduced Sneak Peek, which is a preview of papers under review in our primary research journal pipeline, making papers discoverable earlier in the publication cycle so that authors can surface their research quickly and readers can build on their work. And as I mentioned, star methods was introduced several years ago to improve the transparency of methods, reporting, and reproducibility. Another resource is Cell Mentor, which is a new online resource that provides advice from editors on publishing your work, insights from scientists in the field, video tutorials, and more. And just a few other additional resources that I want to mention. As editors and publishers and trained researchers ourselves, we seek to continually support the collaborative connections between researchers. Our Crosstalk blog features a widespread selection of content, and Cell Symposia provide networking opportunities with short, compact programs that are curated by CellPress editors. Lab links are free one-day symposia throughout the world, and CellPress webinars focus on research topics versus this one on authoring and are introduced throughout the year. I also want to point out the free coronavirus resource from Elsevier and CellPress and The Lancet. You can find all of our novel coronavirus papers here, and access to all of this content is free. For more information, please go to cell.com, and you can also recommend our journal to your library. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll now take the rest of the time that we have to answer some of the questions that you submitted. So I've been here for about 5.5 years. So next I'll discuss the role of the editor and the editorial process. So the editor is the advocate for your paper, and he or she will oversee the review process and communicate with authors and reviewers, and tries to make the process as fast, efficient, and fair as possible. We also keep up with advances in the field by reading broadly across other journals and attending scientific meetings, and we guide the strategic development of the journal and of CellPress. In addition to handling primary research papers, we also commission other pieces for the journal, such as reviews that summarize the literature on a particular topic, previews that highlight our papers, as well as other types of content. So next I want to take you briefly through what happens to your paper after you submit it. So after a new paper is submitted, the abstract is usually read by all of the journal's editors, and it's assigned to one handling editor. And this person will be the primary point of contact throughout the process. The handling editor will read the full paper and background and will discuss the paper with the rest of the editorial team. A decision will be made about whether to reject the paper without review or to send it out for external review. If the paper is rejected, then the handling editor will write the decision letter and explain the rationale for the rejection. And the editor may offer transfer options within CellPress for journals that may be a better fit. If the paper is selected for external peer review, the handling editor will coordinate the review process. So he or she will select experts in the field to review the work and tries to ensure that the reviewers are timely. After all reviews are in, the reviewers are then given some time to read the other reviewers' comments and provide any additional feedback to the editor in a process that we call cross-review that many CellPress journals use. There may then be additional discussions between the editor and the reviewers, and the handling editor will discuss the paper and all the feedback with the rest of the editorial team, and they'll come to a mutual decision. The editor will write to the author to explain the decision, and if the paper is rejected without the option to resubmit, you can discuss transfer options with the editor. Now, if the editors invite a revision, then the author and the editor may discuss a revision plan in more detail, and the authors will then go on to revise and resubmit the paper. And it then goes through the process again, the review process again, and a final decision is usually made at this stage on whether to accept or reject.